Take a deep breath and let your body sink into the most comfortable position you can find. Close your eyes and prepare to journey back to a time when the impossible was possible, when the boundaries between heaven and earth were as thin as morning mist, and when one man discovered the secret that death itself could not hold him. Tonight, as you drift into peaceful rest, you're going to hear the most extraordinary story ever told. A story so incredible that most people have never heard it in its full, breathtaking detail. This is the story of Enoch, the man who walked with God so closely that he simply disappeared. Not died, not was buried, not left any trace behind. He just walked right out of this world and into eternity. But here's what makes this story perfect for your sleep journey. Every word you're about to hear has been carefully crafted to guide you into the deepest, most restorative sleep of your life. As ancient mysteries unfold around you, your mind will drift into that perfect state between waking and dreaming, where profound truths can touch your soul while your body finds complete rest. Imagine living in a world where people lived for nearly 1,000 years, where giants walked the earth and angels descended from heaven, where the very air shimmered with supernatural possibilities. This was Enoch's world, and tonight it becomes yours. You're about to discover secrets that have been hidden for thousands of years. You'll learn why this one man became so dangerous to the forces of darkness that fallen angels feared him more than armies. You'll witness visions of heaven so beautiful that they've inspired seekers for generations. And you'll understand why Enoch's story might be the most important ancient mystery for our modern world. Let your breathing slow as we begin this journey together. Feel your muscles relaxing, your thoughts becoming peaceful, your spirit opening to wonder. For the next 2 hours, you'll be transported to a realm where the impossible becomes possible, where ancient wisdom meets timeless truth, and where one man's walk with God changed everything. This isn't just a bedtime story. It's a doorway to understanding human potential that most people never discover. It's proof that the limitations we accept might not be as permanent as we think. It's evidence that walking with the divine can lead to destinations beyond our wildest dreams. As your eyelids grow heavy and your breathing deepens, prepare to meet the man who proved that death was optional, that humans could become more than human, and that the ancient world held secrets that could transform how we understand our own spiritual possibilities. Welcome to the most peaceful and profound journey of discovery you've ever experienced. Welcome to the story of Enoch, the man who walked into eternity and left behind a legacy that still whispers hope to anyone brave enough to believe that impossible things might just be possible after all. Let the ancient mystery begin. Chapter 1. The mystery that changed history. Close your eyes and let your mind drift back to a time when the world was young and strange. A time when giants walked the earth and angels descended from heaven. Tonight, we journey together through the most mysterious story ever told. The story of a man who did something no other human has ever done. He defeated death itself. Welcome to this peaceful journey through ancient mysteries. As you settle into comfort, Prepare to discover secrets that have been hidden for thousands of years. This is the story of Enoch, the seventh man born after Adam, whose life changed everything we thought we knew about human limits. But here's what makes this story different from every other ancient tale you've heard. While kings built monuments hoping to be remembered, while warriors conquered nations seeking immortality, Enoch found something far more incredible. He found a way to walk right out of death's reach. And if you're hearing this for the first time, prepare to have your mind open to possibilities you never imagined. Imagine living in a world where people lived for nearly 1,000 years, where the oldest humans could remember stories from 20 generations back, where the sky was different, the earth was different, and the very air held mysteries we can barely understand today. This was Enoch's world, and it was about to end in the most catastrophic way possible. The ancient Hebrew text tells us something that seems impossible. Genesis chapter 5 verse 24 says simply, "Enoch walked with God, and he was no more, because God took him away." No death, no funeral, no grave, just gone. Taken up while still breathing, still living, still walking with the divine. But what does it really mean to walk with God? Throughout all of human history, only 2 people have escaped death entirely. Enoch was the first, and you're about to learn why this matters more than you might think. Here's a question that will challenge everything you believe about human potential. If one ordinary man could walk so closely with God that death became optional, what does that say about the limitations we accept in our own lives? What if the boundaries we think are permanent are actually choices? Let your breathing slow as we explore this together. The story of Enoch isn't just ancient history. It's a map of human possibility. It's proof that the impossible might be possible. And it starts in a world that was about to be destroyed by water. Picture this. Every morning for 300 years, Enoch woke up and chose to walk with God. Not once in a while, not during religious ceremonies, every single day. And something incredible began to happen. The closer he walked with the divine, the more human limitations began to fall away. The ancient world watched this ordinary man transform into something extraordinary. They saw him receive visions that revealed the future. They witnessed him speak with angels as easily as we speak with friends. They watched him grow in wisdom and power until he became more than human, yet somehow still beautifully, recognizably himself. But here's where the story gets controversial. Some ancient texts claim Enoch didn't just disappear. They say he was promoted, transformed into the highest-ranking angel in heaven, given a throne next to God himself, and made the keeper of all divine secrets. If true, this means a human being became one of the most powerful entities in the universe. Coming up, we'll discover the shocking world Enoch was born into. A world where fallen angels walked among humans, where giants ruled through fear, and where corruption had spread so far that God himself was preparing the ultimate cleansing. But first, let me ask you something that might keep you thinking long after this story ends. If Enoch could transcend human limitations through walking with God, why do we settle for so much less? Why do we accept spiritual mediocrity as normal? And most importantly, what would happen if more people took his example seriously? As you relax deeper into comfort, consider this. The story you're about to hear suggests that human potential is far greater than we usually imagine, that the spiritual realm is more real than the physical one, and that death itself might not be as final as we've been taught. The ancients called Enoch the seventh from Adam, and 7 was the number of completion, of perfection, of divine fulfillment. His birth marked a turning point in human history. His life bridged the gap between earth and heaven. His disappearance proved that the impossible was possible. And here's what makes this even more amazing. Enoch wasn't born with special powers. He wasn't chosen because he was perfect. He was selected because he was willing to walk with God when others walked away, willing to trust when others doubted, willing to transcend when others accepted limitations. Before we dive deeper, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. This journey through ancient mysteries has just begun, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Hit that like button if you're already feeling the power of this incredible story. So, settle in comfortably, let your mind open to wonder, and prepare for a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about human potential. Because the story of Enoch is ultimately the story of what becomes possible when someone decides to walk with God instead of walking away from Him. The mystery that changed history is about to unfold, and by the end of our time together, you'll understand why this ancient story matters more today than ever before. Chapter 2. Before the Great Catastrophe. Let your imagination carry you back to a world that seems like a dream and a nightmare combined. The earth before Noah's flood was nothing like the world we know today. Picture a planet where morning mist rose from the ground to water every plant, where no rain had ever fallen, where the climate was perfect from the North Pole to the South Pole. This was the world Enoch was born into, a world caught between paradise and horror, a world where humans lived for centuries, where knowledge accumulated over lifespans that boggle the modern mind, where technology advanced to levels that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years. But here's what makes this world truly incredible. The boundary between heaven and earth was thin. Angels walked among humans as commonly as we might encounter neighbors. The spiritual realm wasn't hidden behind a veil of doubt and skepticism. It was visible, touchable, undeniably real. Imagine watching your great-great-grandfather still alive and working after 400 years. Picture cities where the youngest inhabitants were older than entire modern civilizations. Think about the wisdom that could accumulate, the skills that could develop, the inventions that could emerge from minds that had centuries to perfect their craft. The ancient world was a place of wonders that challenge our understanding of history. Humans worked with metals in ways that modern science struggles to replicate. They understood astronomy with precision that rivals our best computers. They built structures so massive and perfect that we still can't figure out how they did it. But with all this knowledge and longevity came unexpected darkness. When people live for centuries, their capacity for both good and evil grows to incredible proportions. Without the natural limitation of short lifespans, human corruption had time to develop into something monstrous. Here's a controversial question that ancient texts raise. What if human death wasn't originally part of God's plan, but became necessary because people were using their extended lifespans for evil instead of good? What if mortality was actually a mercy, preventing humans from becoming too corrupted to save? The spiritual beings called Watchers were supposed to observe and guide humanity. They were sent from heaven to help the children of Adam learn and grow. But something went terribly wrong. These divine beings began to desire what they were meant to protect. They started wanting human women, human pleasures, human power. 200 angels made a pact on Mount Hermon. They swore an oath to abandon their heavenly posts and descend to earth, not to help humanity, but to rule it, to take whatever they wanted, to satisfy desires that were never meant to be satisfied. And here's where the story becomes truly shocking. These fallen angels didn't just corrupt themselves, they corrupted their human lovers too. From these forbidden unions came children who were neither fully human nor fully divine. Giants, called the Nephilim, beings of incredible strength and insatiable appetite. The Nephilim weren't gentle giants from fairy tales. They were monsters who consumed everything around them. First the crops and livestock, then each other, then finally human beings themselves. The earth groaned under their weight, literally and spiritually. But the corruption went even deeper. The fallen angels shared knowledge that was meant to remain hidden. They taught humans how to make weapons of war, how to practice sorcery, how to read the future in the stars, how to craft jewelry and makeup that would inflame lust and vanity. Think about this. What if every major technological advance in human history came from spiritual sources? What if the knowledge we pride ourselves on actually originated from beings who rebelled against God? It's a disturbing thought that makes you question the true source of human achievement. If you're finding this story fascinating, make sure to like this video and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Share this with friends who love ancient mysteries and biblical stories. You're experiencing something that most people never get to hear in this detail. The world was filling with violence like water filling a bathtub. Not just physical violence, but spiritual violence. The corruption of innocence, the perversion of justice, the mockery of everything good and pure and true. Creation itself was being turned upside down. Animals that had once been peaceful began to hunt each other. Plants that had given fruit freely began to grow thorns. The harmony between humanity and nature broke down completely. Even the ground seemed to rebel against what walked upon it. Cities became centers of oppression, where the strong devoured the weak without consequence. Knowledge became a tool for domination rather than service. Beauty became a weapon of seduction and control. Love became lust. Wisdom became cunning. Truth became whatever the powerful said it was. Here's a question that should make us all uncomfortable. How different is our modern world from the one that God decided to destroy with a flood? Are we making the same mistakes? Are we using knowledge for destruction instead of healing? Are we worshipping strength instead of righteousness? The spiritual realm was in chaos. Holy angels watched in horror as their former companions led humanity toward destruction. The very fabric of creation was being torn apart by rebellion and corruption. Something had to be done before the damage became irreversible. But in the midst of all this darkness, there was a family that remembered, a bloodline that had preserved the memory of Eden, the knowledge of God, the hope of redemption. Seth's descendants had chosen a different path. They called upon the name of the Lord when others called upon demons. They walked in righteousness when others walked in rebellion. And from this faithful family line would come a man who would bridge the gap between the corrupted earth and the pure heaven. A man who would walk with God in a way that hadn't been seen since Adam strolled with his Creator in the Garden of Eden. Coming up next, we'll discover the incredible lineage that produced this extraordinary man. You'll learn about the 7 generations that led to Enoch's birth, and why the number 7 held such powerful significance in the ancient world. But first, consider this challenging thought. The world before the flood had every advantage we could imagine. Longer lifespans, advanced technology, direct contact with spiritual beings, perfect climate, abundant resources. Yet it became so corrupt that God decided to start over. What does this tell us about the true source of human problems? Is it our circumstances, or is it our hearts? As you continue to relax and let these ancient truths wash over you, remember that this story isn't just about the past. It's about the eternal struggle between good and evil, between walking with God and walking away from Him. And you're about to meet the man who chose to walk toward the light when his entire world was rushing toward darkness. Chapter 3: The Chosen Bloodline. Breathe deeply and let your mind travel back through the corridors of ancient time. Imagine a family tree where every name carries the weight of divine purpose, where each generation passes down not just genetic material, but spiritual destiny itself. This is the story of the most important family line in human history. It all began with Adam, the first man to ever draw breath. He walked with God in the cool of the evening, hearing the voice of his Creator as naturally as we hear our own heartbeat. But sin shattered that perfect communion. The garden was lost. The walk became a memory. Yet something remained, a deep, aching longing for restoration. Adam lived 930 years, long enough to see the world change from paradise to battlefield, long enough to watch his children scatter across the earth in different directions, long enough to witness both the beauty and horror that would spring from human hearts set free to choose their own paths. His son Cain chose rebellion. He built cities and raised monuments to his own glory. His descendants became masters of music and metalwork, but their hearts grew cold as winter stone. They invented instruments of war and sang songs of vengeance. They turned God's gifts into tools of destruction and death. But Seth, Adam's third son, chose differently. In him, the memory of Eden lived on like a candle flame in a darkened room. He called upon the name of the Lord when others forgot God's existence. He taught his children to seek the face of the divine when others sought only earthly pleasures. Here's something remarkable that most people never consider. Seth became the keeper of the sacred flame, not literally, but spiritually. He preserved the hope that someday, somehow, the broken connection between heaven and earth would be restored, that the walk with God would begin again. Seth lived 912 years, and through all those centuries, he never stopped believing in redemption. His son Enoch lived 905 years, carrying forward the same hope, the same faith, the same impossible dream that humans might once again walk with their Creator. Through Enoch, the line continued to Kenan, who lived 910 years, then to Mahalalel, who lived 895 years. Each generation was carrying forward something precious and fragile, the memory of what had been lost and the promise of what might be restored. But here's what makes this bloodline truly extraordinary. They weren't just preserving religious traditions, they were preserving spiritual DNA. Each generation was being prepared for a specific moment in history when heaven would break through to earth in an unprecedented way. Can you imagine the pressure of being born into such a family, knowing that your entire existence was part of a divine plan that stretched across centuries, understanding that you weren't just living for yourself, but for a purpose that began before you were born and would continue long after you died? By the time of Jared, Enoch's father, the corruption we talked about earlier was spreading like wildfire. The sons of God were looking with desire upon the daughters of men. The boundary between the spiritual and physical realms was breaking down like a dam under too much pressure. Jared lived 962 years. He saw the beginning of the end. He watched as beings of light descended from their high places to walk among mortals with darker intentions. He witnessed the birth of the Nephilim giants. He felt the ground shake under the weight of cosmic rebellion. And into this troubled world, his son Enoch was born. Think about this for a moment. The number 7 held deep meaning in Hebrew thought. 7 days of creation, 7 colors in the rainbow, 7 notes that create all music. 7 represented wholeness, completion, the fullness of time when God's purposes would be perfectly fulfilled. Enoch was the 7th from Adam, not by accident, not by chance, but by the careful design of a God who works through generations to accomplish purposes that individual lifetimes couldn't contain. 7 generations of preparation, 7 chapters of human history, 7 steps toward the restoration of the broken walk between God and humanity. Here's a controversial question that might challenge your thinking. If God was preparing this special bloodline for centuries, planning every generation, orchestrating every birth. What does that say about divine sovereignty versus human free will? Were these people truly choosing their paths, or were they predetermined players in a cosmic drama? Each generation in this line faced the same choice their ancestors had faced: walk with God or walk away from Him, serve the Creator or serve themselves, preserve the light or let it die out in the growing darkness of a corrupted world. Adam was the first, the one who knew God face to face, but lost paradise through disobedience. Seth was the second, the one who chose righteousness when his brother chose rebellion. Enosh was the third, whose name meant mortal or frail, reminding humanity of its weakness and need for divine strength. Kenan was the fourth, living through the time of growing corruption, but holding fast to faith. Mahalalel was the fifth, whose name meant praise of God, teaching that worship was humanity's highest calling even in dark times. Jared was the sixth, witnessing the descent of the Watchers and preparing the way for what was coming. And then came Enoch, the seventh, the completion of the pattern, the one who would restore what had been broken since the Garden of Eden. If you're captivated by this incredible story of divine planning across generations, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Stories like this take hours of research and careful crafting. Your support helps us bring more ancient mysteries to light. The weight of 7 generations rested on Enoch's shoulders. The dreams of Adam, the faith of Seth, the humility of Enosh, the steadfastness of Kenan, the praise of Mahalalel, the witness of Jared. All of it was focused into one man, one calling, one destiny that would change everything. But here's what makes Enoch's story even more amazing. He wasn't chosen because he was perfect. He was chosen because he was willing to carry the burden of his ancestors' hopes, willing to walk with God when the entire world was walking away from him. The bloodline had been preserved through wars and famines, through corruption and persecution, through centuries of waiting for the right moment. And that moment was about to arrive in the form of a baby whose birth would mark the beginning of something the world had never seen before. Coming up, we'll witness that miraculous birth and discover the signs and wonders that surrounded Enoch's arrival on earth. You'll learn why his very name was whispered with awe and fear, and how even as a child, he was different from everyone else who had ever lived. But before we continue, ask yourself this profound question. What if your own family line carries purposes you've never discovered? What if you're part of a divine plan that stretches across generations? What if your willingness to walk with God could impact not just your own life, but the lives of people not yet born? The chosen bloodline had done its work. 7 generations of faithfulness had prepared the way. The stage was set for the most extraordinary life in human history, and you're about to witness the birth of the man who would prove that death was not the end of the human story. Chapter 4. A child born different. Let your breathing settle into a peaceful rhythm as we witness one of the most extraordinary births in human history. The labor began at sunset, and something in the very air seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't going to be an ordinary delivery. The midwives whispered among themselves, sensing something they couldn't name but couldn't ignore. Jared paced outside the tent while his wife's cries echoed into the growing darkness. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient courses, the same stars that had watched over Adam's first steps in Eden. But tonight, they bore witness to something equally significant: the birth of a child who would bridge the gap between earth and heaven. The baby came forth at the darkest hour of the night, but as he drew his first breath, something incredible happened. The eastern sky began to lighten. Dawn was breaking. The long night was ending. A new day was beginning, both literally and symbolically. When Jared first held his newborn son, he felt the weight of destiny in his arms. This was no ordinary child. The very air around the baby seemed to shimmer with possibility. The shadows in the tent drew back, as if light emanated from his tiny form. Even the animals outside grew quiet, as if all of creation was pausing to acknowledge this moment. They named him Enoch, which means dedicated or initiated. The name came to them without discussion, without debate, as if it had been written in the stars before the world was made, as if heaven itself had whispered it into their hearts during those sacred moments after birth. Here's something that will make you think. Ancient texts suggest that certain children are born with a spiritual destiny so clear that their names are actually given by divine revelation. What if some people come into this world with purposes already written in heaven's books? What if Enoch's name was chosen before his parents even conceived him? In the days that followed, strange and wonderful things began to happen around the baby. Animals gathered near their dwelling, as if drawn by an invisible force. Birds sang at unusual hours, creating melodies that seemed almost like worship. Flowers bloomed out of season. The very earth seemed to celebrate the child's arrival. The old women in their community whispered among themselves. They had attended hundreds of births, but never one like this. There was something in the child's eyes that seemed to look beyond the visible world, a depth that went beyond his years, a knowing that transcended normal human understanding. As Enoch grew from baby to toddler, his differences became more pronounced. While other children played with simple toys, he would sit quietly and stare at empty spaces, as if watching invisible friends. He would laugh and clap his hands at things no one else could see. He would sometimes speak single words that sounded like names in languages no human had ever heard. Other parents began to feel uncomfortable around the child. There was something unsettling about his presence, something that made them remember their own mortality, their own spiritual emptiness, their own distance from the divine. Children are usually drawn to each other, but many avoided little Enoch instinctively. But Jared watched his son with wonder and growing understanding. The child seemed to know things he had never been taught. He would point to the stars and make sounds as if calling them by name. He would watch the sky with an intensity that suggested he was seeing far more than clouds and birds. By age 3, Enoch was having what could only be called visions. He would describe angels as if he had seen them. He would talk about a great throne surrounded by creatures of light. He would speak of coming judgment as if he had heard the sentence pronounced by divine lips. Here's a question that challenges our modern understanding of childhood development. What if some children are born with spiritual gifts that our educational system actually suppresses? What if we teach them to ignore divine promptings because we've forgotten how to recognize them ourselves? Jared began to understand that his son was being prepared for something far beyond ordinary human experience. The boy would disappear for hours at a time, always returning with stories of places that existed nowhere on Earth and conversations with beings that no one else could see. The people of their community started to whisper. "Is this the one?" they asked. "The promised one, the one who will restore the walk with God." The expectations were enormous for such a small child, but Enoch seemed to carry them naturally, as if he had been born understanding his destiny. During his childhood years, the world around Enoch was growing darker by the day. The Nephilim giants were multiplying and spreading across the earth like a plague of destruction. The fallen angels were teaching humans knowledge that was corrupting entire civilizations. Violence was becoming as common as sunrise. But in the middle of this darkness, there was a child who seemed to carry light within himself. People would travel for days just to see him, to hear him speak, to witness the phenomenon of a human being who seemed to have one foot in this world and one foot in the realm of spirits. Enoch's childhood was spent learning things that no human teacher could provide. His father taught him the stories of their ancestors, the memory of Adam's walk in the garden, the promises that had been passed down through 7 generations. But the child seemed to absorb these lessons, not just intellectually, but spiritually, as if he were remembering things he had somehow known before birth. Take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. This story goes places that will stretch your imagination and challenge your assumptions about human potential. Like this video if you're already feeling the power of this extraordinary child's story. As Enoch entered his teenage years, his gifts became impossible to ignore. He could sense the presence of angels before they revealed themselves. He could read the signs written in the movements of the stars. He could distinguish between holy spirits and fallen ones with an accuracy that amazed even the wisest elders. But here's what made Enoch truly special. Despite his extraordinary gifts, he remained humble and approachable. He didn't use his abilities to gain power over others or to accumulate wealth for himself. Instead, he seemed burdened by what he saw, saddened by the corruption spreading through the world, driven by a deep compassion for humanity's spiritual condition. The boy was serious beyond his years, thoughtful and deliberate in everything he did. It was as if he understood that his life was not his own, that he had been born for a purpose greater than personal happiness or success. He carried the weight of divine calling with a maturity that should have been impossible at his age. Other young people his age were learning trades, thinking about marriage, planning their futures in normal human terms. But Enoch was learning to navigate the spiritual realm, preparing for a calling that would transcend every limitation that had defined human existence since the fall. Coming up next, we'll see teenage Enoch encounter his first giant and witness how this young man's spiritual authority could make beings 3 times his size tremble with fear. You'll discover how he began to understand his role as a bridge between the human and divine realms. But first, consider this thought-provoking question. If a child could be born with such clear spiritual destiny, what does that say about the purpose written into every human life? What if we all have divine callings that we've simply never learned to recognize? What if the spiritual gifts we see in Enoch exist in some form in every person who chooses to walk closely with God? The child born different was about to become the young man who would challenge giants, confront fallen angels, and begin the most extraordinary walk with God that any human had ever experienced. Chapter 5. Walking Among Giants. Allow your mind to paint a picture of terror and wonder combined. Imagine a young man, barely 20 years old, standing face to face with a creature that towered 30 feet above him, muscles like twisted tree trunks, eyes that burned with unholy fire, a voice like thunder rolling across mountains. This was Enoch's first encounter with the Nephilim giants, and it would change everything. Most humans cowered when they met these offspring of the fallen angels. They fled in terror or collapsed in fear. These giants had grown accustomed to worship and submission from the small humans who scattered like ants before their massive presence. But when they encountered Enoch, something unprecedented happened. The giant looked down at this young man who showed no fear, only curiosity and a strange kind of recognition. "What are you, little one?" the creature asked, its voice shaking the ground beneath their feet. Enoch looked up calmly and replied, "I am Enoch, the 7th from Adam." The giant's eyes widened with something that might have been respect or possibly fear. Even the Nephilim knew the significance of that number. Even these corrupted beings understood that 7 meant completion, divine purpose, the fullness of time when God's plans would be fulfilled. Here's something that challenges everything we think we know about power. True authority doesn't come from physical size or earthly strength. It comes from spiritual connection. Enoch had something that even the mightiest giants couldn't touch, a direct line to the divine that made him untouchable in ways they couldn't understand. The world of Enoch's young adulthood was a realm where the impossible was commonplace. Beings of myth and legend walked the earth as casually as we might walk to the store. The line between the natural and supernatural had been completely erased by cosmic rebellion and divine intervention. Giants weren't the only wonders in that strange world. There were creatures that had no names in any language spoken after the flood. Beasts that were part animal, part spirit. Plants that glowed with their own light. Stones that sang when the wind touched them just right. Reality itself had become fluid, shaped by spiritual forces that modern minds can barely comprehend. But young Enoch navigated this world with wisdom far beyond his years. He understood instinctively which spirits were holy and which were fallen. He could sense the presence of angels before they chose to reveal themselves. He could read the signs written in the sky by the movements of celestial bodies that held meanings lost to later generations. The other young people of his generation lived in constant fear. They had been born into a world where humanity was no longer the dominant species, where humans served at the pleasure of giants, where the strong devoured the weak without consequence or shame or any hope of justice. But Enoch was different. He walked among the giants without fear. He spoke to them as equals. He challenged them when they overstepped their bounds. There was something about his presence that even the mightiest Nephilim respected and possibly feared. What was it about this young man that commanded such respect from beings who could crush him with their bare hands? Perhaps it was his lineage. The seventh from Adam carried spiritual weight, even in that fallen world. Perhaps it was his destiny. Heaven was preparing him for something greater than ordinary life, and that preparation showed in his demeanor. Or perhaps it was simply the light that shone from within him, the reflection of a communion with God that was growing stronger with each passing day. When you walk closely with the Creator of the universe, it shows in ways that even corrupt spiritual beings can recognize. The fallen angels noticed him too. The watchers who had descended from heaven to corrupt the earth saw something in this young man that made them deeply uneasy. He was too knowing, too aware, too dangerous to their plans to ignore. They tried to seduce him as they had seduced so many others. They offered him knowledge that could make him rich beyond measure. They showed him power that could make him ruler over nations. They promised him immortality on terms that seemed to require nothing more than joining their rebellion against heaven. But here's what made Enoch extraordinary. He rejected every offer. He saw through their lies with a clarity that amazed even himself. He recognized their corruption for what it was. He understood that what they offered wasn't freedom, but slavery of the worst kind. Bondage that would last beyond the boundaries of time itself. This is where the story gets really controversial. Think about this. If fallen angels were actively trying to recruit humans in the ancient world, might they still be doing the same thing today? Could some of the opportunities and temptations we face actually be spiritual tests designed to pull us away from walking with God? The young man's refusal to join the rebellion enraged the watchers. They had never encountered a human who could resist their temptations so completely. They had never met someone so young who could see through their deceptions with such devastating clarity. They began to plot his destruction. But heaven was watching too. The angels of God surrounded Enoch with protection that was invisible but absolutely real. They whispered warnings in his ear when danger approached. They guided his steps away from traps that could have ended his life before his purpose was fulfilled. As Enoch grew older, his spiritual gifts became more pronounced and more publicly visible. He could see into the spiritual realm as clearly as he could see the physical world. He could communicate with angels as easily as talking with human friends. He could sense the presence of God in ways that amazed even the most faithful people in his community. If you're fascinated by this story of a young man who walked fearlessly among giants, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear about the power of walking closely with God. Your engagement helps us bring more of these incredible ancient stories to light. The giants began to fear him, not because of his physical strength, which was completely ordinary, not because of his political power, which was non-existent, but because of his spiritual authority, because of the light that shone from within him, because of the voice of God that spoke through him with increasing frequency and power. He was still just a young man, barely into his 20s, but he was the seventh from Adam, the completion of the pattern, the one chosen to bridge the gap between heaven and earth, the one who would restore the walk with God that had been broken since Eden. The world of giants was preparing him for his ultimate destiny. Every encounter with the Nephilim was a lesson in spiritual authority. Every confrontation with the fallen angels was training in recognizing and resisting evil. Every moment of wonder was a glimpse of the greater wonders that awaited him. Enoch was a young man walking among giants, but he was also something more. He was the appointed one, the chosen one, the one who would learn to walk between worlds and find his home in both the earthly and the heavenly realms. Coming up next, we'll witness Enoch's first direct vision of the throne room of God. You'll discover how a human mind processes the sight of divine glory, and why this experience changed not just Enoch's life, but the entire spiritual trajectory of human history. But before we continue, ask yourself this challenging question. If Enoch could walk fearlessly among giants because of his relationship with God, what giants in your own life might seem less threatening if you walked more closely with the divine? What would change about your fears if you truly understood the spiritual authority that comes from communion with the Creator? The young man among giants was about to become something unprecedented in human history, a mortal who would see God face to face and live to tell about it. Chapter 6. The First Divine Encounters. Settle deeper into comfort as we approach the most sacred part of our journey together. Close your eyes and imagine standing at the threshold between two worlds, between the earthly realm you've always known and the heavenly realm that most humans never see. This is where Enoch's story takes a turn that challenges everything we think we know about human limitations. The visions began when Enoch turned 25. At first, they came as fragments of impossible beauty during the moments between sleep and waking. Glimpses of creatures made of light singing songs that had no words but conveyed meaning beyond human language. Flashes of colors that don't exist in our world, painting landscapes that could never be mapped. But then came the night that changed everything. Enoch lay on his bed, caught between consciousness and dreams, when suddenly he found himself standing in a vast throne room made of materials that had no earthly names. Crystal and fire somehow woven together. Walls that seemed to be carved from solidified light. Pillars that appeared to be made from the essence of starlight itself. Before him rose a throne that defied every attempt at description. It wasn't made of gold or precious stones, though it contained the essence of every beautiful thing that had ever been created. It seemed to be carved from pure being, from the very foundation of existence itself. and upon it sat a figure whose face was too bright for mortal eyes to see directly. Around the throne stood beings of incredible beauty, whose wings covered their faces in reverence for the one they served. Their voices joined in harmonies that made all earthly music sound like childish noise by comparison. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty," they sang, "who was and is to come." The young man fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the majesty of what he was seeing. Without being told, he understood that he was standing in the very presence of the Creator, the one who had spoken the worlds into existence, the one who had walked with Adam in the garden, the one whose voice had been calling to him since childhood. Then the voice spoke, not audibly, but directly into his heart, into his mind, into the very center of his being. "Enoch," the voice said, "seventh from Adam, you have been chosen." "Chosen for what, Lord?" the young man asked, his voice barely a whisper in the vastness of that sacred space. "To walk between worlds, to stand in the gap, to carry my words to a generation that has forgotten my voice." The vision faded, but its impact would last forever. Enoch woke with tears streaming down his face, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and joy that he had never experienced before. He had seen the throne of God. He had heard the voice of the Almighty. He had been chosen for something beyond his understanding. But here's what makes this encounter truly remarkable. This wasn't a one-time experience. The visions came more frequently after that first overwhelming glimpse of divine glory. Sometimes Enoch saw the past, watching the creation of the world unfold like a scroll being unrolled. Other times he saw the future, witnessing events that wouldn't happen for thousands of years. Most often, he saw the present in ways that normal human vision couldn't perceive. The spiritual realm that existed alongside the physical world. Angels of God moving among humans, protecting, guiding, influencing. Demons whispering temptations that most people thought were their own ideas. The cosmic battle between good and evil that raged unseen around every human heart. These visions taught Enoch to see reality as it truly was, not as it appeared to earthly senses. He learned to recognize the different orders of angels, the seraphim who surrounded the throne, burning with the fire of God's holiness, the cherubim who guarded the way to the tree of life, the archangels who commanded the hosts of heaven, the ministering spirits who served those who would inherit salvation. He also learned to recognize the fallen ones, the watchers who had abandoned their positions to corrupt the earth, the demons who followed their rebellion, the spirits of the Nephilim who would one day roam the earth seeking rest and finding none. But the visions weren't always pleasant or comfortable. Sometimes Enoch saw the full extent of the corruption that had infected his world, the violence that humans did to one another, the perversion of everything good and beautiful and true, the grief that filled the heart of God as he watched his creation destroy itself. If you're moved by this incredible story of divine visions and heavenly encounters, please take a moment to subscribe. Hit that like button if you're feeling the spiritual power of Enoch's experiences. Share this with someone who might need to hear about the reality of the spiritual realm. Yet even in the darkest visions, Enoch saw hope, the remnant of faithful hearts who still called upon the name of the Lord, the promise that evil would not triumph forever, the plan of redemption that would one day restore all things to their original purpose and beauty. Through these encounters, the young man began to understand his calling. He was to be a bridge between heaven and earth, a voice crying out in the wilderness of human corruption, a light shining in the darkness of a world that had lost its way. But here's something that most people miss about Enoch's visions. They weren't just spectacular experiences for his personal benefit. They were training, preparation, education for a role that no human had ever filled before. He was being taught the languages of heaven, the protocols of the divine court, the secrets that govern the spiritual realm. Each vision built upon the previous ones, creating a comprehensive understanding of how the universe really worked. Not just the physical laws that scientists study, but the spiritual laws that determine the ultimate destiny of every created being. Enoch learned about the nature of time itself, how past, present, and future existed simultaneously in the mind of God, how prayers offered today could influence events that happened yesterday, how choices made in one moment rippled forward and backward through eternity in ways that human minds could barely grasp. He discovered the true structure of reality, the multiple layers of existence that most humans never suspected, the heavenly realms that surrounded and interpenetrated the earthly realm, the places where angels dwelt, and the chambers where the spirits of the righteous waited for resurrection. Most importantly, he learned about love, not human love, which was limited and conditional and temporary, but divine love, which was infinite and unchanging and eternal. Love that could transform the worst sinner into a saint. Love that could bridge any gap and heal any wound and restore any loss. These divine encounters were preparing Enoch for something unprecedented in human history. He was being equipped with knowledge that would be needed for his ultimate destiny, trained in spiritual realities that would enable him to fulfill a role that had never been filled before. Coming up next, we'll discover the most dangerous secrets that heaven revealed to Enoch. Knowledge so powerful and potentially destructive that it had been hidden from human eyes since the foundation of the world. You'll learn why these revelations made him both the most enlightened and the most burdened man who ever lived. But first, consider this profound question. If God is still giving visions and divine encounters to people today, how would you recognize them? What if the spiritual realm is just as active now as it was in Enoch's time, but we've trained ourselves not to see it? What might change in your life if you truly believed that the same God who spoke to Enoch is still speaking today? The young man, who had received divine encounters, was about to become the keeper of heaven's most closely guarded secrets. Chapter 7. Heaven's Dangerous Secrets. Breathe slowly and prepare your mind for revelations that have been hidden from human eyes for thousands of years. What you're about to discover are secrets so powerful, so potentially dangerous, that they were kept in the highest levels of heaven, shared only with beings who had proven their absolute loyalty to God. And Enoch was about to become the first human to receive this forbidden knowledge. In the depths of Enoch's dwelling, beneath the main floor where his family gathered each evening, lay a chamber that few had ever seen. The walls were carved from living rock, covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change in the flickering lamplight. Here, in this sacred space, Enoch began to record the secrets that heaven had entrusted to him. The first revelation was the most shocking: the true names of God. Not just the names that humans had discovered through worship and prayer, but the secret names that held creative power. Names that could command the elements, heal the sick, raise the dead, and bridge the gap between earth and heaven. Each name was a doorway into a different aspect of divine nature. El Shaddai spoke of God's power to provide and protect. Adonai revealed his lordship over all creation. Jehovah unveiled his covenant love. Elohim proclaimed his majesty and might. But there were other names, older and more mysterious, that could only be whispered in the deepest reverence. Here's something that might disturb your understanding of spiritual power. These names weren't just words. They were living entities. Speaking them correctly could literally reshape reality. But speaking them carelessly could bring devastating judgment upon the speaker. This is why they were hidden from all but the most trusted servants of God. The second secret was even more incredible: the true calendar of heaven. Enoch discovered that time itself was structured differently than humans understood. The solar year contained exactly 364 days, divided into 4 seasons of 91 days each. This was the calendar that God himself used, the rhythm by which the heavenly host marked the passage of time. But why was this dangerous knowledge? Because understanding the true structure of time gave power over prophetic events. It revealed when divine judgments would fall, when seasons of blessing would come, when the windows of heaven would open or close. This knowledge could be used for good or evil, depending on the heart of the one who possessed it. The third revelation challenged everything humans thought they knew about the structure of reality. Enoch was shown detailed maps of heaven with its 7 levels and countless chambers. The throne room sat at the center, surrounded by the living creatures who never ceased their praise. But around the edges lay dwelling places of different kinds of spiritual beings, each with specific roles in maintaining creation. Some of these beings were so powerful that their names couldn't be spoken by human tongues. Others were so beautiful that looking upon them would blind mortal eyes. Still others were so terrible that their appearance would drive humans insane with fear. Yet all of them served the same God, each fulfilling their part in a cosmic plan too vast for any single mind to comprehend. The fourth secret was the most personally challenging: the true nature of the human soul. Enoch learned that what humans called their self was actually a composite being made up of multiple layers of existence. The physical body was just the outermost shell. Beneath it lay the soul, which was immortal and indestructible. But beneath the soul lay something even more profound: a spark of divine life that connected every human directly to God. This spark could be awakened through walking with God, as Enoch had learned to do, but it could also be corrupted through sin, creating a spiritual darkness that would persist beyond physical death. The choices made in earthly life literally determine the eternal destiny of this divine spark. Here's a question that should make us all uncomfortable. If every human contains a spark of divine life, what are we doing to nurture or corrupt that spark in ourselves and others? How might our daily choices be affecting our eternal destiny in ways we've never considered? The fifth revelation was about the future of humanity. Enoch saw visions that stretched far beyond the coming flood. He witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, the birth of a child who would be both God and man, the final judgment when heaven and earth would be made new. But these prophecies were written in symbolic language, their meanings hidden from casual readers. If you're amazed by these dangerous secrets from heaven, make sure you're subscribed to hear the rest of this incredible story. Like this video if these revelations are opening your mind to new possibilities. Comment below about which secret surprised you the most. The sixth secret concerned the nature of angels and their hierarchy. Enoch learned that what humans called angels were actually multiple orders of beings with vastly different powers and responsibilities. The seraphim burned with the fire of God's holiness. The cherubim guarded sacred spaces with their many faces and eyes. The archangels served as God's messengers and warriors. But below these were hosts of ministering spirits, each one assigned to specific humans or specific tasks. Every person had angelic beings watching over them, influencing their choices, protecting them from dangers they never knew existed. The spiritual realm was far more active and involved in human affairs than anyone suspected. The seventh and most dangerous secret was the dark knowledge, the complete record of what the fallen angels had taught humanity. The arts of war and magic, the secrets of metallurgy and cosmetics, the knowledge of astrology and divination. All of this had been preserved as a warning of what happened when divine wisdom was perverted by pride and rebellion. But possessing this knowledge created a terrible burden. Enoch could see how every human achievement had roots in spiritual revelation, either holy or unholy. He could trace the source of every invention, every discovery, every cultural development back to its spiritual origins. This made him simultaneously the most knowledgeable and the most troubled human who had ever lived. The eighth secret challenged the very nature of time and causality. Enoch learned that what humans experienced as past, present, and future actually existed simultaneously in the mind of God. What appeared to be linear progression was actually a vast tapestry that could be viewed from different angles. This meant that prayers offered in the present could influence events in the past, that consequences of today's choices rippled both forward and backward through time, that the spiritual realm operated according to laws that made earthly physics seem simple by comparison. These secrets came with strict instructions for preservation. Some knowledge was to be buried in the earth to await future discovery. Other revelations were to be given to Noah before he entered the ark. The most sacred writings were to be memorized and passed down through oral tradition. Nothing was to be lost, for the wisdom contained in these secrets would be needed when the new world emerged from the waters of judgment. But here's the most challenging aspect of these dangerous secrets. They revealed that human beings had far greater potential than anyone imagined. The same spiritual forces that had corrupted the antediluvian world were still active. The same choices between good and evil still faced every generation. The same possibility of walking with God remained open to anyone willing to pay the price. Coming up next, we'll discover why the fallen angels feared Enoch more than any other human. You'll learn about the confrontation that shook both heaven and earth, and why his very existence threatened their entire rebellion against God. But first, ask yourself this profound question. If you had access to heaven's most dangerous secrets, would you use them wisely? What if the spiritual knowledge you're gaining right now through this story carries responsibilities you've never considered? How might these ancient revelations change the way you live your daily life? The keeper of heaven's dangerous secrets was about to face his greatest test. Chapter 8. The Fallen Angel's Greatest Fear. Let your mind drift into the shadows between worlds, where cosmic rebellion still echoes through eternity. In the depths of the spiritual realm, where fallen angels plot against the throne of God, there was growing terror about one human. Not a warrior king or mighty giant, but a simple man who walked with God. His name was Enoch, and he had become their greatest fear. Why would beings of incredible power, ancient beyond human comprehension, fear a mortal man? The answer lies in understanding what Enoch represented. The possibility that humans could transcend their limitations and become something the fallen angels had thought impossible. A bridge between earth and heaven that could not be corrupted, bought, or destroyed. The leader of the rebellion was Azazel, once among the brightest of the Watchers. His beauty had rivaled the morning star itself, before pride twisted his splendor into consuming darkness. For centuries, he had successfully corrupted humans through the knowledge he shared and the desires he awakened. But Enoch was different. He could not be tempted, deceived, or intimidated. In the depths of the second heaven, where shadows gathered like storm clouds, Azazel stood chained between pillars of black stone. His wings were clipped, his face bore the mark of rebellion, and his light had turned to consuming fire. Yet even in his diminished state, he commanded legions of fallen spirits who carried out his corrupting influence on earth. But Enoch's growing spiritual authority was becoming a problem that Azazel could not ignore. Every day that the human walked more closely with God, the fallen angel's power seemed to diminish. Every vision that Enoch received exposed more of the rebellion's secrets. Every prophecy that flowed through his lips brought the day of judgment closer. Here's something that might challenge your understanding of spiritual warfare. The conflict between good and evil isn't just philosophical or symbolic. It's actual warfare between real beings with real power fighting for real stakes. And humans aren't just observers of this cosmic battle. We're the prize being fought over. Azazel had taught humans the arts of war, turning plowshares into swords and peace into violence. But what good were weapons against someone who walked under heaven's protection? He had shared the secrets of seduction and vanity, corrupting hearts through lust and pride. But what power did these have over someone whose heart belonged completely to God? The fallen angel began to understand that Enoch represented something unprecedented in the history of rebellion. Here was a human who had achieved what Azazel himself had lost: perfect communion with the divine. The very thing that pride had cost the fallen angels was being freely given to this descendant of dust. But the threat went deeper than personal jealousy. Enoch's transformation proved that humans didn't need the forbidden knowledge that the Watchers had shared. They didn't need shortcuts to power or secret paths to divinity. They could achieve transcendence through relationship alone, through walking with God in the same way Adam had walked in Eden. This realization sent shockwaves through the ranks of the rebellion. If one human could resist all temptation and achieve perfect communion with God, might others follow his example? Could humanity actually reject the corruption that had seemed so inevitable? Might the entire strategy of the fallen angels be doomed to failure? The other Watchers shared Azazel's growing alarm. Semjaza, who had led the initial descent to Earth, watched in horror as his carefully crafted plan to corrupt humanity began to unravel. The giants they had fathered were powerful, but they were also mortal. They would die in the coming flood. But Enoch's example might inspire a remnant of humanity that could survive the judgment and carry righteousness into the new world. Kokabeel, who had taught humans the signs of the stars, realized that his astronomical knowledge was worthless against someone who received direct revelation from the creator of the stars. Barakiel, who had shared the secrets of lightning, discovered that his power over the elements meant nothing to someone who walked with the God who commanded all nature. If you're fascinated by this cosmic battle between fallen angels and one faithful human, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to understand the reality of spiritual warfare. Your engagement helps us reveal more of these hidden truths. The fallen angels tried everything they could to stop Enoch's spiritual progress. They sent demons to torment him with nightmares and fears, but his faith remained unshaken. They stirred up human opposition against him, turning friends into enemies and neighbors into accusers. But he continued to walk with God regardless of earthly persecution. They offered him wealth beyond imagination, showing him treasures hidden in the earth and promising him dominion over vast kingdoms. But Enoch's eyes were fixed on heavenly treasures that made earthly riches look like worthless dust. They threatened him with violence, sending their giant offspring to intimidate him. But he walked among the Nephilim without fear, protected by angels that the giants could sense but not see. Most desperately, they tried to corrupt him through the same methods that had worked with other humans. They sent the most beautiful women to seduce him, women whose appearance had been enhanced by forbidden knowledge. But Enoch's heart belonged completely to God, leaving no room for corrupting influences. Here's a controversial question that might make you uncomfortable. If the fallen angels were using beauty, wealth, power, and pleasure to corrupt humans in ancient times, might they be using the same strategies today? Could some of the temptations we face actually be spiritual attacks designed to pull us away from walking with God? The failure of every corrupting strategy filled the fallen angels with rage and desperation. They had never encountered a human who was completely immune to their influence. They had never met someone whose spiritual authority was growing so rapidly that it threatened their own power structures. But their greatest fear wasn't just about Enoch himself. It was about what he represented, the possibility that other humans might achieve the same level of spiritual authority. If walking with God could transform one man so completely, might it transform others as well? Could humanity actually escape the spiritual prison that the fallen angels had spent centuries constructing? The rebellion that had seemed so successful was suddenly facing the possibility of complete failure. The corruption of humanity, which had appeared irreversible, might actually be temporary. The judgment that was coming might not destroy God's plan for humanity, but rather purify it and prepare it for even greater things. As Enoch's spiritual authority continued to grow, the fallen angels realized they were facing something more dangerous than any army or weapon: hope. The hope that humans could transcend their limitations. The hope that walking with God was still possible. The hope that redemption might be available even in the darkest of times. This hope threatened to undermine everything the rebellion had accomplished. If humans could achieve transcendence through relationship with God, what need did they have for the forbidden knowledge that the Watchers offered? If perfect communion with the divine was available through simple obedience and faith, why would anyone choose the corrupting path of rebellion? Coming up next, we'll witness Enoch's final warnings to humanity before the flood. You'll discover how he tried to turn his generation back to God, and why his message was both the most hopeful and most terrifying prophecy ever delivered to the human race. But first, consider this challenging thought. If one man's faithful walk with God could strike fear into the hearts of fallen angels, what might your own spiritual growth accomplish? What if the opposition you face in trying to live righteously is actually evidence that you're threatening the powers of darkness? How might this change your perspective on spiritual struggles? The fallen angel's greatest fear was about to be confirmed. Humans could indeed walk with God and transcend every limitation that rebellion had tried to impose upon them. Chapter 9. Humanity's Final Warning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the great marketplace as Enoch stood before the largest crowd he had ever addressed. His white hair caught the light like spun silver, and his voice carried an authority that had been building for over 2 centuries of walking with God. This would be his final sermon to a world that stood on the edge of divine judgment. The crowd that gathered was unlike anything you might see in a modern religious setting. Giants towered above ordinary humans, their massive forms creating shadows that chilled the air. Some of the fallen Watchers had taken human appearance and stood among the people, their supernatural beauty masking hearts filled with rebellion. Children who had never known innocence played games that mimicked the violence they saw daily in their corrupted world. "Children of Adam," Enoch began, his words falling like autumn leaves on the upturned faces before him. "The time of choosing is at hand. The scales of justice hang heavy in the courts of heaven, and the weight of human sin threatens to tip them toward judgment. But still, even now, the heart of God yearns for your return to righteousness." A wealthy merchant in the crowd laughed, his gold teeth glinting in the sunlight. "Old man," he called out, "you have been prophesying doom for decades. Where is this judgment you speak of? The sun still rises, the rains still fall, the harvests still come. Your God, if he exists, seems powerless to act." The crowd murmured its agreement, comfortable in their disbelief. They had heard warnings before. Religious fanatics had predicted disasters that never came. Why should this elderly prophet be any different? They had cities that reached toward the sky, knowledge that unlocked the secrets of the earth, arts that created beauty rivaling the work of the gods themselves. But Enoch's eyes grew distant, as if he were seeing beyond the present moment into the realm of eternity. "The flood that comes will not be like the gentle rains that water your fields," he said, his voice carrying across the marketplace with supernatural clarity. "It will be a deluge from heaven and earth combined. The very fountains of the deep will break forth in their fury. The waters will rise until they cover the highest mountains, and every living thing that breathes will perish beneath their weight." Here's something that should make us think about our own time. How many warnings do people receive before judgment falls? How many opportunities for repentance are given before patience runs out? And most importantly, how do we recognize when warnings are coming from God rather than from human fear or fanaticism? A woman dressed in fine silks stepped forward, her voice sharp with scorn. "You speak of death and destruction, but what of the wonders we have accomplished? Our cities reach toward the sky. Our knowledge unlocks the secrets of the earth. Our arts create beauty that rivals the work of the gods themselves. Would your God destroy all of this for the sake of his wounded pride?" The prophet's face grew sad, the lines around his eyes deepening with the weight of sorrow that only someone who had seen divine perfection could understand. "The wonders you speak of are built on foundations of blood and tears," he replied gently. "Your cities are monuments to oppression. Your knowledge is stolen from heaven and used for destruction. Your arts celebrate the very corruption that has brought judgment upon the world. What good is beauty if it decorates a rotting corpse? What value is knowledge if it leads only to death?" From the back of the crowd, a young man called out, his voice cracking with emotion. "But what of the children? What of the innocent who have done no wrong? Would your merciful God drown babies in their cradles for the sins of their parents?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and even Enoch's supporters shifted uncomfortably. This was the hardest part of the message he carried. The judgment that was coming would not discriminate between the guilty and the innocent. The flood would not pause to evaluate the worthiness of each individual life. Enoch closed his eyes, and for a moment, his listeners could see the pain that the coming judgment caused him. "The children are indeed innocent," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and their blood will cry out from the waters like the blood of Abel cried out from the ground. But consider this: what kind of world are we leaving for them? A world where innocence is bought and sold, where strength is the only virtue and weakness the only sin. Sometimes mercy wears the face of judgment, and the kindest act is to end a story that has no hope of a happy ending." Take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that like button if this powerful message is moving your heart. Share this with someone who needs to hear these ancient warnings that are surprisingly relevant to our modern world. The crowd grew restless, some pushing forward to hear better, others beginning to drift away. A priest of the Watchers, his robes marked with symbols of forbidden power, raised his staff for attention. "You speak of one God," he declared, "but we have many. The Watchers have given us gifts that your jealous deity would withhold. They have taught us the arts of war and peace, the secrets of the earth and sky. Why should we fear a God who hides in shadows when we can serve those who walk among us in the light?" The prophet's voice grew stronger, filled with the fire of divine authority that had been building within him for centuries. "The Watchers you serve are prisoners awaiting their final judgment," he said, his words cutting through the morning air like a sword. "They have given you gifts that are poisoned at the source, knowledge that leads to death, power that corrupts those who wield it. They promise you godhood, but they deliver only slavery. They would make you like themselves, fallen, rebellious, and ultimately doomed." An old woman bent with age and sorrow pushed through the crowd to stand before Enoch. Her eyes were clouded with cataracts, but her voice was clear and strong. "I have lived through 90 summers," she said, "and I have seen the slow decay of the world. In my youth, men kept their word and honored their parents. Children obeyed their elders, and strangers were welcomed with open arms. Now brothers fight brothers, and children curse their parents. If your God can cleanse this corruption, then let his judgment come." Enoch placed his hand gently on the woman's head, and for a moment she seemed to stand straighter, as if touched by the same divine power that flowed through the prophet. "You have spoken wisdom, daughter of Eve," he said. "There are still those who remember the old ways, who mourn for the innocence that has been lost. For their sake, one righteous family will be preserved through the flood, carrying the seeds of a new world in their hearts." As the sun reached its zenith, the crowd began to disperse. Some walked away with thoughtful expressions, others muttering curses under their breath. But Enoch remained in the marketplace, his voice continuing to carry the message of warning and hope to any who would listen. He spoke of Noah, the righteous man who was building an ark according to God's specifications. He described the animals that would come 2 by 2, preserving the species for the world to come. He painted pictures of the new earth that would emerge from the waters, clean and fresh and ready for a new beginning. But here's the most challenging part of Enoch's final warning. It wasn't just about the flood. It was about the eternal choice that every generation faces. The choice between walking with God and walking away from Him. Between building on the foundation of divine truth or building on the shifting sand of human pride. As the afternoon wore on and fewer people stopped to hear his words, Enoch's message grew more urgent and more personal. "The time is short," he declared, "and the patience of God is at an end. Choose this day whom you will serve. Choose life or death, blessing or curse. The ark is almost finished, and soon its door will be closed by the hand of God Himself. When that day comes, there will be no more time for choosing, no more opportunity for repentance." Coming up next, we'll witness the most extraordinary event in human history, the day that death was defeated. You'll discover exactly how Enoch's transformation happened and why his disappearance sent shockwaves through both the earthly and heavenly realms. But first, ask yourself this sobering question. If you had been in that ancient crowd, would you have listened to Enoch's warning or walked away like most others did? What warnings might God be giving to our generation that we're choosing to ignore? And most importantly, what would it take for you to truly choose to walk with God instead of walking away from Him? Humanity's final warning had been given. The time of grace was running out. And the man who had delivered this message was about to experience something that no human before or since has ever experienced. Translation from mortality to eternity without passing through death. Chapter 10. The day death was defeated. Settle into the deepest comfort you can find, for you are about to witness something that has happened only twice in all of human history. Today, we watch as an ordinary man steps across the ultimate boundary that has confined every human since Adam. Today, death itself is defeated not through resurrection, but through translation. Today, Enoch walks into eternity. The morning of Enoch's translation dawned with a silence that seemed to hold its breath. Birds forgot their songs. The wind stilled its restless movement. Even the insects ceased their humming. It was as if all creation paused to witness an event that would be remembered until the end of time itself. The sky held the pale blue of early dawn, but there was something different about the light. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, soft and warm and full of expectation that made the air itself feel alive with possibility. This was not just another sunrise. This was the dawn of something unprecedented in human experience. Enoch rose from his bed, as he had for thousands of mornings, but this time his movements carried a different quality. His aged body felt lighter, as if the weight of years was beginning to lift from his shoulders. His wife noticed the change immediately. The way his eyes seemed to hold starlight, the way his skin glowed with an inner radiance that made her want to reach out and touch him, yet somehow afraid to do so. "Today is different," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. She had been his companion for centuries, bearing his children and sharing his extraordinary burden. but she had always known that he belonged to God in a way that transcended ordinary human relationships. Now, looking at him in the morning light, she saw the truth that her heart had always known. He was not entirely of this world. Enoch smiled, and in that smile was all the love and tenderness of their long life together. "Yes, beloved," he said gently, "today I walk a different path. But do not grieve, for this is not an ending, but a beginning. The one who made us has purposes beyond our understanding, and his love for you does not diminish because he calls me to a different service." Throughout the morning, family and friends began to gather at Enoch's dwelling. Word had spread through some mysterious means that this day would be significant, though none could say exactly what they expected. Methuselah stood close to his father, his own great age making him seem like a child beside the ancient patriarch. The scrolls and tablets containing Enoch's revelations were carefully arranged, each one a treasure that would need to be preserved for future generations. The knowledge he had received from heaven could not be allowed to perish with his departure from the world. As the sun climbed higher, Enoch began to speak. His words were not the warnings of judgment that had marked his recent years, but gentle reminders of God's faithfulness and love. He spoke of the covenant that God had made with Adam, the promises that would be fulfilled in generations yet to come, the new world that would emerge after the cleansing flood. "Remember," he said, his voice carrying the authority of one who had seen beyond the veil, "that death is not the master of life. What we call death is simply the doorway between one room and another in our Father's house. The body may return to dust, but the spirit that God breathed into us is eternal. Do not fear the changing of forms, for love is stronger than death, and those who trust in God will find that even the grave cannot hold them." Here's something profound to consider. If Enoch could be translated directly to heaven without dying, what does that tell us about the nature of death itself? What if mortality isn't as permanent as we think? What if the boundary between life and death is more flexible than we've been taught? The crowd grew larger as the day progressed, drawn by the unusual atmosphere that surrounded the gathering. Some came out of curiosity, others from genuine love for the old prophet. Even his enemies were present, though they stood at a distance, uncertain why they had been compelled to witness whatever was about to unfold. As afternoon melted into evening, Enoch began to walk. His steps were slow and measured, but there was a purpose in his movement that drew the crowd along behind him. He walked toward the high hill where he had so often gone to pray, the place where heaven seemed closest to earth. The procession that followed him was unlike any funeral march, for there was no sorrow in it, only a sense of anticipation that grew stronger with each step. On the hilltop, Enoch paused and turned to face those who had followed him. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening heavens. But there was another light gathering around the prophet, a radiance that seemed to come from within his very being. His white hair and beard began to glow like silver fire, and his eyes reflected depths that mortal vision could barely comprehend. "I have walked with God for 300 years," Enoch said, his voice carrying clearly across the hilltop. "I have seen his glory and heard his voice. I have carried his messages to a world that mostly chose not to listen. Now he calls me to walk with him in a different way, to serve him in realms beyond the reach of earthly sight." If you're amazed by this incredible moment when death is defeated, please subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear about the power of walking closely with God. Your engagement helps us share more of these life-changing stories. As he spoke, the light around him grew brighter. The watchers in the crowd began to realize that they were witnessing something unprecedented in human history. This was not death as they understood it, but transformation. Enoch's body was becoming transparent, as if it were made of light rather than flesh, yet he remained solid, still present, still speaking words of comfort and blessing. "Do not think that I abandon you," he continued, his form now shimmering like heat waves on a summer day. "The God we serve is not bound by the limitations of space and time. Love builds bridges that no distance can destroy. Though you may not see me, the bond between us remains unbroken. And in the fullness of time, we shall meet again in the place where parting is unknown." The light intensified until it was almost too bright to look upon, but none of the watchers turned away, for they knew they were witnessing a miracle that would never be repeated. Angels became visible in the radiance, their forms majestic and beautiful beyond description. They surrounded Enoch like an honor guard, their voices joining in harmonies that made the very air vibrate with music. Methuselah stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. "Father," he said, his voice steady, but his heart breaking with the pain of parting. "How shall we remember you? What words shall we speak when people ask about this day?" Enoch reached out and touched his son's face, his hand still warm and solid, despite the transformation taking place. "Remember that God is faithful to his promises," he said. "Remember that love is stronger than death. Remember that even in the darkest times, there is hope for those who trust in the Lord. And remember that walking with God is not a destination, but a journey that begins with a single step." The final transformation came suddenly. One moment, Enoch stood among them, radiant, but still recognizably human. The next moment, he was gone, translated into realms beyond mortal understanding. The light lingered for a few heartbeats, then faded, leaving only the memory of glory and the sweet fragrance of paradise that would cling to the hilltop for generations to come. The crowd stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they had witnessed. Some fell to their knees in worship. Others simply stared at the place where Enoch had vanished, unable to believe that such a thing was possible. But all of them knew that they had seen something that would change their understanding of life and death forever. Coming up in our final chapters, we'll discover what happened to Enoch after his translation and how his story continues to impact humanity thousands of years later. You'll learn about his new role in heaven and the incredible legacy he left behind on earth. But first, consider this life-changing question. If death could be defeated once, might it be defeated again? What if Enoch's translation wasn't just a unique miracle, but a preview of what becomes possible when someone walks closely enough with God? How might this change your perspective on mortality and eternity? The day death was defeated had ended, but the story of the man who walked into eternity was just beginning a new chapter. Chapter 11. Heaven's New Scribe. Let your mind ascend beyond the highest clouds, beyond the farthest stars, beyond the boundaries of the physical universe itself. In the highest heaven, where time moves differently and space bends according to divine will, a transformation was taking place that would reshape the very structure of the celestial realm. Enoch, the man who had walked with God on earth, was being prepared for a role that no human had ever filled. The process was gentle but complete, his earthly nature being refined and purified until it could bear the weight of divine responsibility. His consciousness expanded like a flower opening to the sun, his understanding growing to encompass truths that had been hidden from him during his earthly journey. He began to perceive the intricate connections between all things, the way every prayer and every action rippled through the fabric of creation, like stones dropped in a still pond. The archangel Michael stood beside him as the change occurred, his mighty hand resting on Enoch's shoulder. "You have been faithful in small things," the archangel said, his voice like the sound of many waters. "Now you shall be entrusted with great things. The title you will bear in heaven carries with it power and responsibility beyond human comprehension." The name that was being prepared for him was Metatron, which meant one who stands before the throne. Enoch began to understand the magnitude of what that would entail. He would become the voice of God to the angels, translating divine will into terms that created beings could understand. His words would carry the authority of heaven itself, and when he spoke, the hosts of heaven would listen and obey. But the transformation was not just spiritual. Enoch's body was being recreated from materials that existed only in heaven, substances that could endure the direct presence of God without being consumed. His height increased until he stood as tall as the mightiest angels, his form radiating the same light that emanated from the throne itself. Yet somehow, he remained recognizably himself, the same gentle soul who had loved his family and mourned for his lost world. The divine nature was being added to his human nature, not replacing it, but perfecting it, creating something that was both fully human and fully divine. 72 wings unfurled from his shoulders, each one inscribed with the names of the nations of the earth. These wings were not merely for flight, but for covering, protecting the secrets of God from those who were not ready to receive them. Each feather contained millions of prayers from the faithful, transformed into living light that would carry their petitions directly to the throne of grace. Here's something that challenges our understanding of human potential. If Enoch could be transformed into the highest-ranking angel while retaining his human nature, what does that say about the ultimate destiny of humanity? What if we were created for something far greater than we usually imagine? The archangel Gabriel approached, carrying a scroll that seemed to be made of crystallized flame. "These are your duties," he explained, unrolling the document to reveal writing that moved and shifted like living things. "You will serve as the scribe of the Most High, recording the deeds of men and angels alike. Every word spoken in heaven will pass through your hand. Every decree that goes forth from the throne will bear your signature." Enoch accepted the scroll, feeling the weight of infinite responsibility settling upon his shoulders. He would be the keeper of the divine records, the one who maintained the great library of heaven, where every thought and deed was preserved for eternity. The position required not just perfect accuracy, but perfect judgment, the ability to discern the true meaning behind every action and to record it in the eternal books. The throne room opened before him, its vastness defying description. The pillars that supported it were made of living fire, and the ceiling was a dome of pure light that revealed the glory of God in all its fullness. At the center sat the Ancient of Days, his presence both terrible and beautiful, surrounded by the four living creatures whose praise never ceased. This would be Enoch's new home, the place where he would spend eternity in service to the one who had called him from the earth. As Metatron, he would serve as the mediator between God and his creation, bearing the burden of infinite love and infinite justice. The first task given to him was the most solemn, to record the judgment of the Watchers who had corrupted the earth. As he wrote their names in the Book of Judgment, he felt the weight of their rebellion and the sorrow of their fall. These had been his contemporaries in a sense, beings who had walked among humans and influenced the course of history. Now they would face the consequences of their choices, and he would be the one to record their fate. But the books he would keep were not only about judgment, they also contained stories of redemption. He would record the names of those who chose light over darkness, who walked in righteousness despite the corruption around them. He would write the accounts of Noah and his family, of the faithful remnant who would carry the promise into the new world. If you're inspired by this incredible transformation of a human into heaven's highest angel, make sure you subscribe and like this video. Share this with someone who needs to understand the amazing potential that exists within human nature when it's surrendered completely to God. Every act of love, every moment of faith, every sacrifice made for the sake of truth would be preserved in the eternal records. The angel Raphael showed him the chamber where the prayers of the saints were kept, each one a glowing orb of light that pulsed with the heartbeat of the one who had prayed it. As heaven's scribe, Metatron would be responsible for organizing these prayers, ensuring that each one received proper attention and response. The crown that was placed upon his head was made of light itself, 7 layers of radiance that represented the 7 heavens through which he would have authority. Each layer bore inscriptions in the language of angels, words of power that would give him access to the deepest mysteries of creation. The crown was both a symbol of his authority and a reminder of his responsibility. As the transformation neared completion, Enoch felt the last vestiges of his human limitations falling away. He could perceive all of time simultaneously, see the past and future as clearly as the present. He understood the connections between all things, the way every event was part of a greater pattern that revealed God's perfect plan. The sorrow he had felt over the corruption of the earth was now balanced by the joy of seeing how God would bring good from evil, how the story of redemption would unfold through the ages. The angel Sandalphon, who had once been the prophet Elijah, welcomed him to the ranks of the transformed. "You join a small company," he said, with a smile that held the warmth of old friendship. "Few have been called to bridge the gap between earth and heaven in this way, but the burden is light for those who love the one who called them." Metatron took his place beside the throne, his new nature fully integrated with his eternal calling. He was no longer Enoch, the man who had walked with God, but Metatron, the angel who would serve as heaven's scribe until the end of time. Yet something of his human heart remained, a capacity for love and compassion that would inform his service and make him a perfect mediator between the divine and human realms. Here's a question that should inspire hope in every human heart. If God could transform Enoch into the highest angel while preserving his essential humanity, what might he do with others who choose to walk closely with him? What transformations might be possible for those who surrender their lives completely to divine purposes? Coming up in our final chapter, we'll discover how Enoch's incredible story continues to impact our world today. You'll learn about the legacy he left behind and why his example remains more relevant now than ever before. But first, take a moment to consider this profound truth. The man who walked with God proved that human limitations are not as final as we think. That transformation is possible on the most fundamental level. That walking closely with the divine can lead to destinations beyond our wildest dreams. Heaven's new scribe had taken his place at the center of the universe, but his story was far from over. Chapter 12. The Legacy That Lives Forever. As we reach the end of our journey together through the extraordinary life of Enoch, let your mind settle into the peaceful realization that some stories never truly end. They continue to ripple through time like waves on an eternal sea, touching lives in ways that span thousands of years and countless generations. The morning after Enoch's translation, his family woke to a silence that felt different from any quiet they had ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of his footsteps in the garden or his quiet prayers at dawn. It was the sense that something fundamental had changed in the world itself, as if a bridge between heaven and earth had been built that would never be torn down. Methuselah found his father's scrolls arranged with meticulous care, each one bound in leather and sealed with wax that seemed to glow with its own inner light. As he broke the first seal, words flowed across the parchment in Enoch's careful script. Prophecies of floods and fire, visions of angels and stars, instructions for generations yet to come. These weren't ordinary writings. They carried a weight that went beyond their words, a spiritual authority that Methuselah could feel in his bones. This was more than inherited wisdom. This was a sacred trust passed down like a flame that must never be allowed to die. The family gathered around the scrolls as Methuselah read aloud. Stories of watchers who fell from grace, warnings of judgment coming like rain, promises of redemption hidden in the movements of the stars. The children listened with wide eyes, understanding that they were hearing secrets that few humans had ever been privileged to know. Word spread through the valleys like ripples in a pond. Enoch's name became both whispered prayer and solemn warning. Some claimed they had seen him walking at twilight, translucent as morning mist, but somehow more real than the solid world around them. Others said his voice carried on the wind, speaking truths too deep for mortal ears to fully comprehend. But here's what makes Enoch's legacy truly remarkable. It wasn't confined to his own time or culture. His story began to spread across the ancient world, carried by merchants and travelers, copied by scribes who recognized its significance, preserved by communities who understood its power. The scrolls multiplied like seeds scattered on fertile ground. Each copy carried a fragment of the man who walked with God. His visions were studied in distant lands, his prophecies quoted in foreign languages, his example held up as proof that humans could transcend their apparent limitations. Yet time has a way of changing stories. Facts become legends, legends become myths, and myths become half-remembered dreams. What began as Enoch's simple testimony of walking with God transformed into elaborate tales of cosmic journeys and angelic conversations that may or may not have reflected his actual experiences. The religious authorities of later generations watched this spreading influence with growing concern. These weren't the tame, manageable stories they preferred to tell. Enoch's writings spoke of watchers and giants, of heavenly courts and divine secrets that painted a picture of reality far more complex than their simple teachings allowed. Some scrolls vanished in the night. Others were declared dangerous and heretical. The official version of Enoch's story grew smaller with each generation, reduced eventually to a single verse in Genesis. Enoch walked with God, and he was no more because God took him. But underground communities kept his memory alive. Secret schools taught his visions. Hidden libraries preserved his words. The legacy lived on in shadows and whispers, in code and careful silence, among those who understood that some truths are too important to be silenced by official disapproval. If you're moved by this incredible legacy that has survived thousands of years, please subscribe to hear more ancient stories that challenge our modern assumptions. Like this video if Enoch's example has inspired you to think differently about human potential. Share this with someone who needs to hear about the power of walking with God. The most remarkable aspect of Enoch's legacy isn't found in the books that bear his name or the traditions that preserve his memory. It's found in the hope he awakened, the hope that death is not final, that humans can transcend their limitations, that the spiritual realm is more real than the physical one. This hope has surfaced in every generation since his time. In Jewish mystical traditions that speak of humans achieving divine union. In Christian saints who experienced visions of heaven. in Islamic stories of prophets who were taken up without tasting death. The details change, but the underlying hope remains constant. Modern readers still pause at Enoch's story, wondering what it means for their own lives. Scientists study consciousness and wonder if awareness can exist independent of the brain. Spiritual seekers practice meditation and prayer, hoping to touch the same transcendent reality that Enoch experienced. Even skeptics find themselves curious about this ancient figure who supposedly defeated death itself. Here's a question that every generation must answer. If Enoch could walk so closely with God that mortality became optional, what excuse do we have for spiritual mediocrity? If one human could bridge the gap between earth and heaven, why do we accept separation from the divine as normal? The legacy challenges us at the deepest level. It suggests that the limitations we accept as permanent might actually be choices, that the boundaries we think define human nature might be more flexible than we imagine, that walking with God might still be possible for those willing to pay the price. But Enoch's story also reminds us that transformation comes with cost. He left behind everything familiar: his family, his community, his physical existence. His walk with God required complete surrender, total commitment, absolute trust in divine purposes that went beyond human understanding. The modern world offers countless substitutes for genuine transcendence. Virtual realities that promise escape without transformation. Pharmaceutical solutions that alter consciousness without spiritual growth. Technological dreams of uploaded consciousness that bypass the need for divine relationship. Yet something in the human heart still yearns for what Enoch found. Not just longer life, but eternal life. Not just altered consciousness, but divine consciousness. Not just escape from limitations, but transformation that transcends limitations while perfecting what it means to be human. His legacy lives on in every moment of spiritual longing, every gesture of faith, every step taken toward rather than away from the divine. The man who walked with God has become a permanent part of humanity's collective imagination, a reminder that greater possibilities exist than we usually consider. The story that began in an ancient world filled with giants and angels continues in our modern world, filled with technology and skepticism. The same choice that Enoch faced confronts every generation. Will we walk with God or walk away from Him? Will we accept the limitations that seem so permanent, or will we explore the possibilities that seem so impossible? In quiet moments, when the noise of modern life fades away, His whisper can still be heard, not audibly, but spiritually, not in words, but in the deep longing for transcendence that no amount of human achievement can satisfy. The man who walked into eternity continues to call others to follow the path he pioneered. His legacy is ultimately a legacy of hope. Hope that death is not the final word. Hope that human potential extends far beyond what we usually imagine. Hope that the divine is closer than we think, and more accessible than we've been taught. As you drift towards sleep tonight, carrying these ancient truths in your heart, remember that the story of Enoch is ultimately your story too. The same God who walked with him is still walking, still calling, still offering the possibility of transcendence to anyone willing to take that first step of faith. The man who walked with God and was no more because God took him away has become eternally present in the hopes and dreams of all who dare to believe that walking with the divine is not just an ancient memory, but a current possibility. His legacy lives forever in every heart that chooses to walk toward, rather than away from the source of all life and love and transcendent hope. The whisper continues, calling across the centuries. Come, walk with God. The path is still open. The destination is still possible. The transformation is still available to those who choose to take the journey. And in that whisper, the legacy of Enoch lives on, as eternal as the God he chose to walk with, as permanent as the hope he awakened, as lasting as the love that called him home.